An Israeli attack on a Syrian airbase has been widely condemned. The US Special Envoy warns it could have caused a direct confrontation with Turkish forces. So why did Israel attack the base? And what are the implications? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the program. I'm Anna Burns-Francis. Israel's attack on a Syrian airbase risked causing a direct confrontation with Turkish forces. That's the warning from the US ambassador to Turkey and Special Envoy Tom Barrack. Tuesday's strike in northern Syria near the Turkish border has been sharply condemned by Syria, Turkey and the Arab League. It also comes despite strong Trump administration support for Syria's President Ahmed al-Sharaa, who led forces which toppled the Assad regime in December of 2024. Since then, Israel has destroyed military facilities across Syria to prevent the country rearming. It also occupies part of Syria, including Golan Heights. So, why did Israel launch this attack on an airbase? What are the implications for all sides? We'll talk to our guests shortly, but first, this report from Alexandra Byers.
First came the fighter jets, then the explosions.
We didn't know where the strikes hit at first, then we heard they were at the airbase. My children were sleeping and I was awake. The children and family got scared and all the neighbours around woke up.
According to Syrian state TV, 8 Israeli airstrikes hit this military airbase in the northwest, damaging its runway and storage facilities, but not causing any injuries. It's Israel's latest attack on Syrian soil since March. The Syrian Foreign Ministry called it an unjustified act of aggression, putting regional stability at risk. The airfield has been out of service since 2013. But it's just 70 kilometers from the Turkish border. Israel's accusing Damascus of allowing Turkish troops to deploy within Syria, saying Israel and Syria agreed to a security status quo, which Syria was on the verge of breaching by allowing Turkish troops to deploy. Israel warned Syria this would pose a threat to Israel's security, and Syria chose to ignore those warnings. The Turkish president dismissed the allegations as frivolous, saying they aim to legitimize Israel's unlawful airstrikes targeting Syria's sovereignty. And the accusations stem from what he called Netanyahu's expansionist and destabilizing policies in the region ahead of elections in Israel. Israel has systematically bombed the Syrian Air Force, launching hundreds of attacks since the Assad regime was toppled in late 2024. It says it's determined to keep the new administration from rebuilding Syria's military capacity. That's despite Syria's President Ahmed al-Sharaa saying he wants peaceful relations with Israel and seeks a security agreement between the two. Israel's also opposed to a substantial Turkish presence in Syria. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has been a vocal critic of Netanyahu's government and its genocide in Gaza. But the latest Israeli attack also comes into conflict with U.S. policy towards Syria. Washington's been forging close ties with President Sharaa, making him the first Syrian leader to ever visit the White House. The U.S. ambassador to Turkey and Special Envoy Tom Barrack condemned the attacks as an unnecessary escalation, saying Sharaa's government wasn't predatory or maintaining proxy forces, and has repeatedly indicated a preference for de-escalation with Israel. Barrack says the U.S. will continue to host diplomatic discussions to try to prevent any future attacks. Alexandra Byers, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Let's bring in our guests for today's show. Joining us from Ankara is Murat Yesiltas, Director of Foreign Policy Research at the SETA think tank. In London, Haid, Consulting Fellow with the Middle East and North Africa Programme at Chatham House. And from Whitefish, Montana, Michael Mulroy, a former US Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defence for the Middle East. A warm welcome to all of you. Thank you. Murat, I'll start with you. What is the message being sent by Israel by this strike?
I think there are different types of message that Israel is trying to give to Syria and Turkey. I think first and foremost, it's about, at least here in Ankara, many believes that it's a campaign tool for Netanyahu. Israel needs an enemy, and Turkey fits, I think, this description about the enemy, the next enemy of Turkey. And so, therefore, it is understood as part of Netanyahu's political campaign. It will be useful for Israel in the context of its domestic struggle to win the election. Beyond that, political narratives, I think there are also other driving factors behind the Israeli airstrike in Syria. Of course, the military context is really important in that context. And as we know, there is an agreement between Syria and Turkey in terms of calibrating and strengthening Syrian security and military capacity. And we know that Israel, I think, is opposing to establish a sustainable, strong military capacity of Syria. Number two is especially about, containing the Turkish presence, military presence in Syria. There has been already a consensus and status quo agreements between Turkey and Israel and Syria, of course, but by targeting Idlib, which is really close to Turkish border, I think Israel is signaling to Turkey that Turkey should be limited its military presence in the context of its own influence, area of influence in the north, because we know that based on the open source sources, Turkey has preparing to establish military base in Idlib. I think this is a reaction against Turkish preparation to establish a new military base under the context of agreement between Turkey and Syria.
Hey, can I come to you, given what Murat has just said about the relationship between Turkey and Syria as it stands at the moment? Can Israel justify this strike?
Well, from their point of view, they're trying to say that the status quo has changed. But if you look at least the Israelis' own red lines, since the fall of the regime, you would notice that even their own red lines have shifted. At the beginning, they started saying that we don't want a military zone or demilitarized zone around southern Syria, closer to the deconflicting lines between Syria and Israel. Then they said that we don't want any Turkish presence in central or southern Syria. Now we are seeing even more, like another shift in their narrative, saying that even any change in the status quo will not be accepted, given the fact that Turkey has already military presence on the floor, on the ground in Syria, and Syria is a sovereign country, and the attack itself has not been, there's no reason that provoked it directly. And if you give on top of that, the fact that Syria has been trying to breach some sort of security arrangement with Israel, you would see that all of those factors don't mean that the attack itself was not justified. And this is why you have seen condemnation from all the countries in the region and beyond.
Michael, can we pick up on Haid's comment there that the status quo has changed, was Israel's argument? In fact, if we read the statement, they said Syria was on the verge of breaching. They're not even claiming that it was a direct breach. How difficult is it, Michael, to work out where the red line is if you are Syria or Turkey at this point?
So, Anna, to start with, after the war in Gaza started and continued, the relationship between Turkey and Israel deteriorated substantially. And of course, after al-Shura took over, Israel immediately moved to essentially destroy as much as they could of the Syrian military. So this is kind of a continuation on that, those 2 points. As far as, from a practical standpoint, if they thought that Turkey was going to deploy multiple military units to this base, the only real opportunity without directly attacking Turkey, which is a NATO ally of the United States, would be to obstruct the airfield. And that's what it sounds like they did. So I think they would say they deliberately did so before Turkish forces got there. They chose to do it in a manner that didn't injure or kill anybody. Not that that justifies it under international law, but they seem to be trying to mitigate both to prevent these Turkish forces from deploying, but also not cause a larger rift, which is already happening, I believe, between Israel and the United States.
Can we talk about that rift a bit further? Do you think this is a sign? I mean, there's been a lot of speculation about the relationship between Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump of late. But this is also being described, this particular strike, as a sign of extraordinary defiance by Israel. And I'm wondering if it's maybe not just domestic politics for Benjamin Netanyahu that is driving this, but that he is now willing to publicly show that defiance or that lack of respect for his relationship with someone he once described as a good friend.
Yes, I mean, I think that's a fair point. I do think domestic politics does play a lot. Obviously, the election coming up on October 27th, I believe, is playing a big factor in this. He's publicly rejected the peace plan that the Board of Peace, which President Trump is the chairman of, put forward for Gaza. And doing it publicly, I think, is setting a statement primarily to his domestic audience, but he can't help but know that President Trump's going to have different feelings on that. Same issue or similar issue in Lebanon. And now, as you pointed out in your report, the United States does support the government of al-Shura. And obviously, the relationship between President Erdogan and President Trump's pretty strong. So doing this is going to further, I think, exacerbate the rift that's going on right now. It won't rupture the relationship or anything like that. But it certainly is going to be a challenge because this does go in the face of the U.S. policy for multiple reasons.
Murat, can we talk about that point there that Michael raised at the beginning of his first answer, that the breakdown really, or if there was a breakdown to be had, occurred significantly over the conflict in Gaza, the way that Israel has bombed Gaza and Turkey's objection to that. And of course, the US does have a relationship with both Turkey and, of course, with Israel. How does that shift, I guess, the point in the middle between all three of these? How does the Venn diagram move for the US in terms of navigating that relationship with Turkey?
Yes, I think this triangle, the relationship of triangle is really important when we look at the historical, trajectories of the Middle Eastern politics. I mean, Turkey, United States, and Israel. But now is the conjecture and the status quo has, I think, dramatically changed. And United States, first of all, Turkey relationship is in good mood, and United States and Turkey has a lot of geopolitical priorities, common priorities. We, I think, have experienced this common converging priorities in Syria. I mean, Turkey and United States have already solved their divergences over the issue of YPG. And when we look at the wider geographical strategic landscape, there are also a lot of convergences between United States and Turkey. But unfortunately, we cannot say the same things for Israeli-Turkish relations. The mood and the narratives has dramatically changed. It is not possible to see any sort of a new rapprochement between two countries because of the Israeli genocidal policies in Gaza. I think this is number one. It is not only about this. I think when we look at the Israeli security policies, we also see a huge dramatical change in terms of the military doctrine. So it will directly bring a sort of confrontation points between Israel and Turkey. And when we look at the Syrian case, I think Syria is an exceptional and existential file for Turkey for a number of reasons. Security, of course, is one of the important one, but other problems in Syria, because Syria is in a transitionary period in which Turkey is trying to support a lot. And when we look at Israel is trying to undermine the entire security architecture in Syria and politically transition period. But when we look at the Israeli-US context, there are also a lot of problems in terms of prioritizing what will be the next in the context of Syria and in the Middle East. But we can say that US can play a lot of constructive role in terms of the escalating situation between Turkey and Israel. Now, Turkey is really cautious and really careful in terms of not engaging any direct military confrontation against Israel in Syria. But there are a lot of cases that can be an accidental issue between two countries. So therefore, US can play a role over Israel and over Turkey, as we saw in the message of Tom Barak.
Hey, can I ask you here, because there's another three-way relationship, which is the one between Israel, Syria and the US. Do you think Israel feels threatened by Syria's renewed efforts to join the world stage and to make that diplomatic outreach with the US?
Well, basically Israel is framing the whole situation and from basically that lens. But if you look at the actions of the new government in Syria or new authorities in Syria, you'd see that they have not done anything to indicate that they have any sort of ill intent towards Israel. From the beginning, they have said that we are ready to discuss through political channels any concerns that Israel has and then try to address that in a peaceful way. However, Israel did not choose to go through that sort of diplomatic channel. For me, I think what the American speaker, I forgot his name now, mentioned about the tense relationship between Netanyahu and Trump is not only a matter of basically winning the elections. It's a matter of basically survival for Netanyahu, and unless he wins the upcoming elections, he could basically go to jail. So I think we should not overestimate the importance of the risk that Syria currently poses or could potentially pose towards Israel, but rather focus at why Netanyahu is basically choosing this path. Because if you look at the situation from Israeli perspective, I think we have to differentiate between the interests of Israel and the interests of Netanyahu personally, and those are not the same.
Yeah. Michael, can we talk more about the messaging then out of America? Because the US ambassador, Tom Barak, the envoy, has been quite forceful in his words and the language he's used. He's called this strike serious, worrisome, unnecessary was the language he used. As of late, there were other comments made recently about a Turkish military installation at Damascus airport. Israel was pushing that this was a threat to its security. Barak said the civilian infrastructure does not pose a security threat to Israel. There is a lot of pushback here in that messaging that we are seeing from the US, but does it go any further than simply making those public comments?
Also, it's important to point out that's from the U.S. ambassador to Turkey. So
yes.
that is what we would expect it to be. I imagine Ambassador Huckabee, the U.S. ambassador to Israel, isn't saying the same statements. That's not to mean that they're not important, but ultimately it's the White House statement that's going to be controlling on this issue. And I think it's a delicate balance. I mean, the U.S. has accepted al-Shura as the government, as you mentioned in your report, the first Syrian leader to come to the White House. But Israel never has. They never bought into the reformed jihadists from Jalani to al-Shura. So it's clear that there's a complete different perspective from Israel and the United States on this. I think that's not going to be resolved, quite frankly, certainly not with the current government in Israel. And I do agree, when it comes to these elections, it's not just the political life of Prime Minister Netanyahu. It's potentially serious legal jeopardy if he's no longer the prime minister. So he has every intention to try to remain in office. And right now, although it's far from determined, his coalition is behind the coalition of Gadi Eisenkot. So this is something that I think he's looking at. He's going to try to do everything he can to maintain his position for multiple different reasons.
You mentioned there that Israel has never accepted this new government of Ahmed al-Shura. Is there any reason why they should? There would be an argument that regional instability in Syria serves to Israel's benefit, that it destabilizes one country, that keeps the attention away from Israel.
So if that's the intent of Israel, then this would be one way to do it. And the United States, and I think most countries in the region, or outside of the region would like to see stability in the Middle East. So if there was a normalization of relationships between Damascus and Tel Aviv, this would be, I think, to the benefit of the region. But obviously, you can see by Prime Minister Netanyahu's actions that that's not his intent. I mean, he's sent troops into southern Lebanon, he sent troops into southern Syria, and many would say he really pushed the United States to go to war with Iran, and is currently pushing for that to resume as a full-scale war. So stability doesn't seem to be the aim of Prime Minister Netanyahu in the region.
Murat, Turkey clearly views its role here as having an ability to help ensure Syrian stability and a path forward. Does it need American support to achieve that?
I think yes. I mean, it's not limited to with Syria, and from a broader perspective, I think Turkey is trying to establish a sustainable regional order. There are a lot of attempts to do this, to achieve this, but when it comes to Syria, I think there are a lot of challenges, and we have not been speaking fairly about the challenges in Syria since the dramatical changes in our region after the fall of Assad regime, including the war between Israel, United States, and Iran. I think it dramatically changed the strategic landscape and the way in which the actors' position and understanding about the region. So still, I think Turkey needs regional countries' support in Syria. It is not only an issue that Turkey can do with its own capacity. I think in that context, United States' role is really important, especially in that context, in that potential military confrontation between Israel and Turkey. I think this is not a benefit for Israel. This is not benefit for region and Syria and Turkey, of course. But of course, I think one thing I have to mention regarding the Israeli position, as the speakers also mentioned, I think there are differences between the different institutions inside Israel. So Netanyahu, yes, he's really eager to use Turkey as a framework of threats for domestic consumption during the election campaign. But I know a lot of institutions and different figures within Israel, from especially military institution, that confronting with Turkey is not a good idea. I think, and the second one, they believe that presence of Turkey inside Syria will also benefit for Israeli security. I mean, I know that this is a really interesting understanding from a Turkish perspective, but many believe that if Turkey can consolidate Syrian security, at the end of the day, Israel will also benefit from this security. I think this is really important, and many US officials understand the situation from this perspective.
Hey, can we go back to your comment that you made earlier about red lines and shifting red lines? Is there any benefit to Syria engaging in diplomatic talks with Israel through the US? Is there any plan that would make its security more assured and remove Israel's presence more?
Well, let's be honest, Syria does not have that many options right now. And I think the only option, which is as well the best option, is to continue basically its efforts to reach some sort of diplomatic or security arrangement through the US. The US has not been able to finalize an agreement between the two, but the US has been able to make a lot of progress in basically narrowing down the differences, reaching common ground between the two countries. However, I think we also have to be quite sort of realistic about what could be achieved before the elections. It's clear that Netanyahu is not interested in de-escalating, is not interested in reaching an agreement before the elections. But That's why I think everyone is now waiting to see what will happen in the elections, because most of the sort of analysis indicates that if there is a change in government inside Israel, then the whole basically position towards Syria will be different, and potentially a deal could be easier to be reached or to be concluded. However, even if Netanyahu stays in power, I think his calculations might also change a bit, and the pressure that the US could put on him might make that last mile easier to sort of cross.
So, Michael, who makes the next move then? Because the election is still a couple of months away. Does Syria sit back and wait to see what happens? Does Turkey take a proactive approach and go into negotiations with one of these parties?
So I don't know that much will change. I would agree with both of my fellow guests. There are elements within the Israeli national security structure that would take a different approach towards Syria and potentially Turkey. And it might be that the main opposition figure, Gadi Eisenkot, is reflective of those opinions because he was the former chief of staff of the IDF. So I don't know, of course, can't pretend to say what he would do, but I think a lot of people are looking at him as a potential, if he is, in fact, the prime minister, would change a lot of the current policies of Prime Minister Netanyahu in a way that would be more stabilizing for the region. So we'll have to see who comes out on top. I don't pretend to be a political analyst at all, let alone for Israeli politics. But there is a potential that after this election on October 27th, if a government is formed different from the current one, that we could see a substantial shift, at least when it comes to the regional issues, such as the issue with the Syrian government in Lebanon and potentially even Gaza.
Michael Mulroy joining us from Whitefish, Montana, former US Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defence for the Middle East, and Ankara in Turkey, Murat Yesiltas, Director of Foreign Policy Research at the SETA think tank. And from London, Haid, a consulting fellow with the Middle East and North Africa programme at Chatham House. Gentlemen, thank you all for your time on the show. And thank you too for watching. You can see the programme again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on X. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. For now, that's it from me, Anna Burns-Francis, and the team here. Al Jazeera's coverage continues in a moment. Stay tuned.